Woo. Hello guys, welcome to Data Tricks by Nathan. It's such a beautiful day, and if this is your first time here, let's go ahead and subscribe right away. So today we just want to quickly look at how you can use SUMIF, AVERAGEIF, and COUNTIF to perform some complex data analysis operations. Alright, so are you ready for this video? Let's jump right in. The link to download the data used in this tutorial is in the description, so click to download and follow through. Alright, so let's jump right in. Okay, so the very first thing, I'm going to take this off so that we all start fresh. Alright, so the very first thing we want to do here is to look at average if. Okay, so if I go ahead and I enter the Excel function for average if, and I come over here, Excel prompts us on the various arguments to enter. So you have range, criteria, you have average range. So the very first thing we'll do is to work with the first and the second argument, right? So we have range and we have criteria. So this is optional. We would go ahead and use it after now, but let's first do the range and the criteria options here. All right, so the very first thing we'll do is specify the range. Okay, what is the range here? The range, because we are looking at average quantity, the range, it's the quantity column, right? And that is E2. Our data ends at E51. So we specify that. So once that is specified, the next criteria is quantity. So let's say we want to look at average quantity for all sales that are greater than one. Average quantity for all sales that are greater than one. Okay, so we'll go ahead and specify our condition with a quotation mark because it is not already in the Excel sheet. So once we specify that and close our brackets, we have that average quantity greater than 1 as 2.479. Okay, and lots of decimals. All right, and of course, I've shown in previous videos that you can always format this the way you want to two decimal places by just clicking the comma here at the home tab. All right, so we just move on. Okay, so this is how you can do this using just two of the criterias, two of the options rather, or arguments, depending on what you call it, to populate your average if. Okay, so now would make it a bit more complex, and just to mention that this same thing applies to SUMIF and COUNTIF. Of course, we also demonstrate that, but with much more complicated conditions. All right, so back to this. So let's say instead of just doing a simple check of average where quantity is greater than one, we want to do a check based on product ID. So let's say for product 18, what is the average quantity of goods sold for product 18? What is the average quantity of goods sold? So what do? We begin with a range, right? Okay, so the range in this case, it's the range where the criteria will be found, right? So in this case, we are looking at the product ID column because that's it's the range that contains the criteria. All right, so we'll specify D2 to 851, D851 there. All right, and then we'll specify the criteria. Okay, so the criteria here, it's P18. So because it is already in the Excel file, we can go ahead and pick it, right? But if it is not, we'll have specified it with double quotation marks. Okay, so that's done. Recall that we would at the end want to populate for the remaining values here in the product ID, the values that are of interest to us. So what do? We want it in a way that when we drag these around, right, it would maintain the column, right? It maintain the column J, and of course continue to increase the values of the row. So what do? We lock up the column, and that is pretty straightforward with a dollar. So we are locking up the column, but we are leaving the row. So that's why we are not adding any other dollar here. So if we're going to lock up the row, we'll just add an extra dollar here. In this case, we're just locking up the column. All right, so that's done. We are good there. and then specify the average range. So the range where average has to be calculated. So in this case, we are running the calculation on the E column, and that is going to be E851. Okay, so and here we go. So the average quantity for P18 is 2.08. And if we drag this down, we'll see the average quantity for P10 is 1.67, P13 is 2.09, and so on to P28. All right, so that is how you can use average if to perform some averaging based on a given condition. All right, so what if we want to know the revenue? So, how much did we make from P18 across the period? How much did we make from P10 across the period? All right, so the entire conditions are pretty much the same, just a difference in function. So, that is where we make use of SUMIF. All right, now that's just like in average, you can guess. Can you guess what's going to be here? Yeah, I'm sure your guess is correct. Okay, so the range then is going to be the range where the criteria will be found. In this case, it is again D851. And then we specify the criteria. The criteria, so we'll look up the column. Our criteria is P18. Okay, so we'll have that P, P5 rather. Sorry, that is J5 there because we are picking the product ID column. All right, so once we have that, and then we have the sum range. The sum range, we're looking at revenue. All right, so I'll first pick my revenue and then I'll populate the revenue column. So I left it empty because the data that I have shared here does not have the revenue populated. All right, so would do that computation. So we'll have it as H2 up to H851, and then we'll close it. So we'll have it 0. Okay, so our revenue, of course, is quantity multiplied by price. This is our quantity column, and this is the price column. And there we go, we have that. And then once you double click quickly, you just have the entire revenue populated. So once that is done, you would see the revenue gets populated here. And when I drag it down, this picks the sum of the revenue across the various product ID specified. So let's go ahead and format this properly. Okay, so if you click in here, for example, you will see that it references P10, which is J6. Okay, and then it picks and it checks all mentions, all right, of P10 within that column. Okay, so something else I need to mention here is that we also need to lock up the cells for our product ID. That is to ensure that when we are dragging it down, right, it is also not starting from the next range. So if you check this, for example, you would notice that it has started from the P16 range. It has started from the D3 value P16 and then it goes down, right? So we'll just do that to fix it. So what do? We are looking up the D colon. All right, so we want this to always start from D2 and end at D851. So we'll lock this, unlock this, we'll lock this, and we'll lock this. And same here for the quantity column. We'll also log this and log this because our quantity is fixed. We don't want it moving around when we do our checks. And there we are. All right, so once you do that, the values as is. Okay, so same thing with this. We'll go ahead and lock up our D column because that range is fixed. We'll also go ahead and lock up our H column because the range is fixed. So this will ensure accuracy of your values when you drag things around. Okay. All right. So you see that there is an adjustment on that value for P40. Okay. So we'll do the same thing for count. So for count, what we are doing, it's same. So we are trying to return the count of goods sold for P18 within the period. All right. Now, count only has two arguments or two inputs required. So you have a range and then you have a criteria. All right. So the range is the range within which the count has to be done, and the criteria is the criteria for the count. All right. So what do we go ahead and do? Our range here. Remember that count is just counting one line at a time, basically, right? So that is why it doesn't make sense for Excel to increase the number of inputs that should or can be taken in for the count. All right. So apologies, I'm sure you can hear the sound of dog barking. That's my neighbor's dog. We don't let us rest. All right, that's a funny one there. Okay, so we just move on to what we want to do here. It would specify our range, and the range in this case, we're counting for cells, right? So what do we want to do? We can just quickly use product ID, right? So that works because it's counts. Okay, so just as usual, we'll lock it up so that the cells are not moving up and down. Okay, so we are taking it to 851. All right, and then what is the criteria here? The criteria in this case, it's this. So we'll lock up the colon so that it's not moving, and then we'll specify that we are picking J5, right? So once you do that and you have it, so you have your count. So this quickly shows us that P18 was sold 13 times within the period under review. And when we drag this around, we'll see the various counts for others. And of course, if you want to go ahead and prove the values, you can do a filtering. If you have issues on how to filter in Excel, you can just consult my last video, my previous video on master data cleaning in Excel. Okay, so you can just add a filter, pick out all the P10s, and do your verifications or validation. All right, so this is how you can combine, this is how you can quickly do count if, sum if, and average if on Excel to return values of interest within a particular period. Okay, so moving on, we want to look at nested functions. So nesting in Excel simply means adding one function into another. And Excel allows you to nest up to 60 functions at a time. All right. So you're just basically combining various functions. And this is something we've done in our previous video, but I'm bringing it here to show you how you can bring it on and bring it together with your sum or any other condition that you want to make use of it on, and also to show you how powerful some of these functions are. All right, so consider a scenario where your firm is running a promo. Okay, so the promo term says sell 50 units of product P13 to get 10% bonus. Now, assuming this promo has just been concluded and you as data analyst of the firm is asked to do a check based on product P13, right? And then you're asked, so let's assume this particular order sheet is for one of the salespersons, right? So you're asked to do a competition for this salesperson and determine what the bonus of the salesperson will be. So remember the condition again is to sell 50 units of P13. So let's say the firm is trying to push out the product P13 to customers. So if you sell 50 units, you get 10% of your total sales. All right. So sales in this case is being tracked as revenue. Okay. So what do? We start with an equal to, and we have an if function. All right. So The next thing we want to do here is to fix our logical test. All right. So a logical test, what is going to be a logical test in this case? So we are saying that if our sale is up to 50 units, then it is qualified for a check. All right. So what we'll do is to do a logical test to say count if on the condition, and what is going to be the condition. So we are saying within the range of product IDs, so let's say D2 to D851, right? Our criteria here, it's P13, so specify that, okay? And then we'll close our bracket. Is greater than 50, then this is the value to return if true. So the value to return if that condition is true, it's sum, okay? So we would have our 10% bonus first here, okay? So we are going to say 0.1 times the sum. So you're not just going to, so you're basically saying, okay, fine. When the quantity is more than 50, then do a sum. But again, we specify our sum if condition to say do a sum if that range. So what's our range again? D2 to D851, right? On the criteria P13. So do not just sum everything. If this condition is met, don't just sum everything in. So if this condition is met, right, where it is 50, greater than 50, do not just sum everything in a revenue column. We'll get to revenue shortly. But we are saying sum everything that meets the condition where product ID has P13. All right, so we'll then specify our sum range, which is revenue column, and that is up to 851. All right, so there we go. We close that sum if, and we close the second bracket to close our if. Okay, so let me explain this again. So what we have done here is to say if, so we have a count if, first of all, to say if P13 quantity when counted is greater than 50, then kick off this condition. Okay, kick off this condition here, which is this. This is the condition. So we are saying that if D2 to D13 based on P13 as criteria is greater than 50, do a revenue check and multiply by 0.1. So check for all revenues based on the criteria P13, then times 0.1. So this is going to be the seller's bonus. Okay, so you are ensuring that the revenue the person makes is only based on P13. The bonus is only based on P13. All right, so if that condition is false, then return a 0. Okay, so our formula would have worked, right, even if we did not add the last condition. And this is because it is absolutely optional. All right, okay, so we just have that. See, if it doesn't work, return a 0. So a return 0, and that is why you have a dash sign here. So if I go ahead and reduce these conditions from 50 to say 10, you will have a value of $513. So this is the bonus that the salesperson is going to make for selling the product P13. So you see how you can quickly and easily combine some of these functions into a nested function to perform some complex analysis that serves your purpose as a data analyst. Okay, I hope you found this video very helpful. And if you did, please go ahead and like it. Feel free to share and subscribe to this channel. And I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you.